All right, everybody. Well, thanks for coming out to the Willamette University Sustainability Network's event for 420. We're really excited to have Anders in as our speaker. And before we get too far into the event for this evening, we're going to start with our land acknowledgement. So regardless of where we all happen to be digitally in this moment, Willamette is on the land of the Kalapuya, who are today represented by the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Silence Indians, whose relationship with this land continues to this day. We offer gratitude for the land itself, for those who have stewarded it for generations, and for the opportunity to study, learn, work, and be in community on this land. We acknowledge that our university's history is fundamentally tied to the first violent colonial developments in the Willamette Valley. And finally, we respectfully acknowledge and honor past, present, and future Indigenous students at Willamette. Thank you. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for this evening. Anders Mintz is a digital marketing specialist with a focus on brand building in the cannabis space. Using his passions for environmentalism and art, he's pushing the envelope in sustainable design concepts and organic growth for legal marijuana businesses. Anders is going to lay out what he believes to be the most worrisome and unsustainable parts of the cannabis industry in the context of social, economic, and the environmental sectors. Thanks for being with us this evening, Anders, and I'll hand it to you to go ahead and start sharing your screen, and we'll go from there.
Perfect. Can you hear me all right?
We can.
Wonderful. I'm going to stop my video here and then share my screen. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. I actually wrote my thesis on this topic, so kind of revisiting some of those points, and it's still an issue more today than it is it even was when I wrote my thesis back in 2017. So pretty interesting stuff, at least I believe so. I've been working in the industry for about 8 years now, almost 9. So definitely have put in my time. And, so these are both things that I've seen in the news, things that are both published in, journals. Thankfully, there is a good amount of, research coming out around the plant now. It's starting to get a little bit more, commercialized in a sense, but also studied as a part of it, just becoming larger. So as I've been working in the industry and, from what I've seen, these are kind of, some of the most, worrisome stuff in regards to sustainability. So just kind of quickly off the bat, like a quickly developing industry does come with a cost. According to Forbes, cannabis industry is one of the fastest growing industries in America. There is just a continued increase for, in demand for cannabis and hemp products, CBD, THC, everything between hemp clothing, everything like that is just increasing in demand over recent years. But the DEA's Schedule 1 listing really prevents proper oversight and regulation for the plant. So there's kind of a lot of things that slip through the cracks, while at the same time, a lot of big scale corporate influence is happening, both, on an economic level, but also on the legislative level. They have a lot of influence in the laws that pass and the legalization, millions and millions of dollars invested by some of these large MSOs, we call them multi-state operators, who are, basically corporate giants in the cannabis space at this point. And kind of depending on no matter what level you are, the main focus for cannabis businesses recently, from what I've seen, is profitability and growth. Everybody's kind of just trying to stay afloat. Everybody's just trying to grow in whatever way possible, whatever deems necessary. This is both a previous kind of look at the industry size in US dollars, billions, that the industry has generated as far as revenue, just as gross revenue, 13 million in 2019, almost 20 million in 2020, with an increase in 21 and a projected increase as soon, as far as the eye can see, basically, as soon as it's legally, hopefully, if and when that happens, it becomes legally available and we have, a decriminalized market or a legal market, it's just going to explode even further. So definitely going to be an increased demand for other aspects of the industry, and even more, reason for us to take a look at some of these concerning factors. The way I kind of define sustainability and what I kind of look at as far as a model for corporate sustainability is actually from a 1987 World Commission report that the UN had drafted. It's really, it holds up even to this day. I think it's just a great report, and it kind of breaks it into 3 sectors, both, again, economic efficiency. A business has to be, economically efficient to succeed. Social equity, a business has to be socially equitable to be a truly sustainable business, and then also has to be environmentally sustainable as well. So, ultimately, any business, no matter what it is, if they want to be a sustainable corporation, you want to try and be in that sweet spot somewhere kind of like intersecting between all three of these. But cannabis companies are heavily focused in the economic efficiency. We've started to branch into the social equity part of things, and then environmental, I would say personally, from what I've seen, is last on the list. So there's a little bit happening, which I'm going to talk about, but really there's great strides to be made in this industry. Kind of talking about, those three categories, social, environmental, and economic. I kind of broke it out into what I think is the most concerning portion of each of those. So for social, the social part of it, the cannabis industry has a giant public health problem, like absolutely, massively concerning. Lab testing is faulty and inaccurate. Potency wise, how strong is this product? A lot of people don't know what they're getting, what contaminants are in the product, mold, mildew, all, very concerning for the industry. And, there have been falsified lab results for profit as well. An Arizona laboratory a few years ago back, down you see at the bottom, was fined $500,000 for intentional inaccurate results. And this is happening across the board. There are recalls for pesticides and synthetic fertilizers that make it through that were, banned or weren't previously banned, but are now banned, including, vitamin E acetate, which ended up killing 68 people in 2020 from THC infused vape cartridges. And that's an absolute travesty. That gives a bad image to the entire industry. Most of them were illegal cartridges, but some of them were legal cartridges that made it to the Oregon market. These are contaminated products that are regularly making it to industry and market shelves, which is very concerning. And along with that, the continued criminalization of cannabis, even though it's legal in a lot of states, and more than 30 states have some sort of medical or recreational stance on marijuana, or legislature for marijuana. There's still a lot of states where people are getting arrested at a ridiculously high rate. So obviously the health of the public is reliant somewhat on people staying out of jail and being able to get jobs and housing, and that's very difficult if you have felonies under your belt for minor amounts of possession. Sometimes grams, joints, or something at that point, just tiny amounts. So the continued criminalization, along with those other things, I think are big public health issues that still persist to this day in the industry. The next part of the kind of three pillars is environmental. I think the carbon footprint of the industry, just kind of, summed up, is the most worrisome part by far. It's a resource intensive plant just right off the bat. It requires high intensity lighting, heating, cooling, humidifiers, computer controls. Like, the energy consumption is just vast to grow this, especially in Arizona, which is already a resource deprived area with water and stuff. It's estimated even as high as 1% of the nation's total energy use on any given year is going solely to cannabis growing. So that's just, staggering numbers considering the number of industries that are in America, that any one could be, consuming that much that isn't, a coal-based industry or petroleum-based industry is something worth noting. And, as long as America has 45% or more of its nation's energy coming from coal and petroleum-based sources, the cannabis industry is going to be pulling from those sources as well. So big concern there. And it also uses more water than conventional crops. I'm talking about specifically about, the flowering, the budding cannabis, not like hemp, that's a little, they're all kind of different as far as their environmental impact. But to grow big, beautiful, flowers, you need pesticides, you need fertilizers, you need a lot of water. You just got to be artificially pumping this plant as much as you can, because that's where they get their profits. So it does use more water, like I said, along with synthetic pesticides and fertilizer usage. Waste disposal is not, entirely regulated in all states. So runoff, ecosystem impact, plus, the fact that a lot of pesticides and fertilizers are petroleum-based products in and of themselves, just kind of adds to the overall carbon footprint. And what I honestly consider to be one of the largest issues is the reliance on plastic packaging, specifically like non-recyclable single-use materials. Pretty much everything that you get in the industry also has to be child-proof or, exit bag compliant. So it has to be cannabis in a jar that goes in a bag, you know what I mean? That sometimes goes in another bag that people walk out the door with to stay compliant. And, alcohol doesn't have these same rules. And, a lot of other substances, even pharmacies, you can walk out in a stapled paper bag. But unfortunately, the way that the laws are in a lot of states, it encourages and it forces, in a lot of senses, cannabis companies to just have an excess amount of waste that, oftentimes isn't regulated and is just staggering. I'll talk about it a little bit more, but at the dispensary I worked at alone, we had 3 locations and we went through an estimated 40 to 50,000 plastic containers every single month. And I was our dispensary is only 5% of the market share of the industry. So, consider that 95% of the industry isn't accounted for. And we were producing 50,000 of them ourselves in just these little pop top, plastic containers, which are pictured there in the bottom right. Also, there's doob tubes, which we call them, pre-roll or joint tubes, and then Mylar bags for the cannabis itself. So just a staggering amount of waste coming out of this industry, not to mention that to grow the plant itself is already resource intensive. So that, adding to the entire carbon footprint, this is a little graph showing, the relative water usage per other, main crops in America. This also comes from the Journal of Cannabis Research, which is one of the best, in my opinion, sources for legitimate, trusted cannabis research. Not all of it is 100% accurate, but they do have a lot of really good studies and peer-reviewed studies on there as well. And then the final kind of pillar of sustainability is the cost or economic portion of it. And I think for cannabis industries, cost is the ultimate factor, the ultimate hurdle that you have to overcome. Sustainable packaging in general, whether it's recyclable or biodegradable, is oftentimes 30 to 40% more expensive than traditional packaging, which really, discourages businesses from choosing that sustainable option. Not to mention there's just a lack of sustainable packaging options just in general in the industry. Especially because of, the child-proof requirements and other stuff like that. It relies on plastic to meet a lot of these requirements. It's expensive to invest in sustainable methods, whether it's water reclamation cycles or systems or LED lights, automating your system. And some of these, grows are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square feet too. So you just think about the carbon footprint of it, not to mention the cost to run and operate a facility like that. And if it's already set up to retrofit it all with sustainable growing methods is going to cost you millions and millions of dollars. Corporate influence on legislature, I keep mentioning it. The dispensary I worked at here in Arizona previously donated $250,000 to the Prop 207 legislature to help, kind of with lawyer fees and, to get some of the laws written in the favor of the businesses. And the total donations from all dispensaries was near 3 million. So lobbying is a real thing in this industry. It's as prevalent as ever. It's just as problematic as it is in other industries. And, as a result of that, sustainable legislature is often excluded, but social equity has started to kind of pop up in legislature, which is good. We're still not there, where we need to be, but, we're getting there. Plus other, financial barriers such as high state taxes. We get charged exorbitant fees from like payroll companies or other ancillary services that just don't like working with cannabis businesses because there is a liability to working with us because we are federally illegal. So taxes at the end of the year are very difficult for us to write off. And we are a cash only business, which, quote unquote, cash only businesses. Banks are afraid to work with cannabis companies. So it makes, banking and money storage and everything very challenging for the industry, which is just yet another hurdle for it. But at the same time, corporate cannabis is among us. This Trulieve deal, which I have on the right side of the screen, was a $2.2 billion deal, which is the largest ever in the world for any sort of cannabis acquisition. So the money is out there. The investors are out there. The backing is out there. I think what is needed is a mentality shift. The industry is a little bit behind other industries. Even, Amazon and some of these other large corporations have, sustainable boxes or recycled PCR material or whatever. But I think this industry just needs to catch up a little bit in general. The money is there. Like I said, there's large corporations, there's, big business in cannabis. I just think most of it is profit over people, which is a phrase that gets thrown around a lot. People would rather, businesses would rather make the money than invest that little bit extra to give back socially or give back environmentally, unfortunately. What is being done? Obviously, not all of it is negative. So we got to take a look at some of the positives that are being done as well. Recyclable and biodegradable packaging is becoming more available. It's expanding as far as options and companies. I listed a couple companies there if you want to check them out on your own time. LED lighting and other technologies are becoming more affordable. Solar is a little bit more affordable. A lot of things are becoming, more affordable as far as the technology portion of growing, which is a lot of it. State-funded government programs, subsidies, and taxes. Denver and Boulder as well, they have a cannabis sustainability working group. They also require to a certain extent that you offset your carbon footprint if you are a cannabis grower consuming an exorbitant amount of energy, to offset that with solar credits or wind energy credits or something like that. Arcata, California, if you surpass a certain threshold of energy usage, there's a 45% tax just instilled on your energy right away, just because of the excess consumption that comes from it. So it is noticed. Governments are starting to get involved. I would argue that there's not enough of it, but there is enough out there right now for, governments and agencies who are thinking about legalizing or thinking about making that shift from medically legal to recreationally legal in their state. Like, there are other models out there that we can follow. They just need to be implemented. Social equity and expungement programs are starting to pop up as well. A couple organizations there I listed that are solely for trying to get people out of jail, reduce sentences, help with the social side of it, which, like I said, is a big part of public health. I think, everybody has to have a safe place to live, got to stay out of jail, got to, be able to make money and live their life. And so these groups are really doing a great job of encouraging that and, pushing forward the social portion of sustainability in the industry, which I'm a big fan of the Last Prisoner Project myself. And then there are some third-party companies focused on sustainability now that, it's few and far between. I am kind of working with doing some work for a company called Resinate Recycling, which I will show here. And they're a local Arizona company. Really, really cool what they're doing as far as, keeping trash and waste out of landfills. So really, they turn traditionally non-recyclable plastic waste into usable goods like planter pots or, cannabis, tobacco rolling trays, storage containers. Really, really cool. Really, their mission is dedicated to building a long-term solution for the better use and reuse of materials. A lot of what they do is almost more upcycling than it is recycling, but is, sole purpose is to target those non-traditionally recyclable materials, which is pretty much everything in the cannabis industry. So they have set up partnerships with dispensaries to where you can donate your old materials and drop off your old containers and stuff, and then we collect them and then they make them into usable goods like that. So very unique process, to where they partner with the dispensaries and the plastic waste is diverted. They have, a shredder that they shred it all into tiny little bits, and then they melt it down, injection mold it into different materials. And it's really, really cool. It's all done in-house. It's all local. And any waste that they do have, they end up selling to another company that specifically recycles polyethylene and other non-recyclable plastics. So they really are a closed loop system, no waste, pretty much a zero waste facility as well. I really love what they're doing. And since I'm in the digital marketing space, I'm kind of assisting them with their website and pitch deck. And, we want to grow. We want to, implement more systems and, more kind of programs like this, whether it's nationwide or even just more so in the Arizona industry. But I'm 100% behind what they're doing. Since 2019, they've captured more than 393,000 plastic containers. So just massive amounts. That's nearly 8,000 pounds of plastic prevented from going into landfills. And that's with 12 or less dispensary locations for recycling and pickup. Like, they're just getting started. There's 130 dispensaries in Arizona. So the potential for this to grow, especially in states like Oregon or, Washington maybe, or parts of California where they really do care about sustainability, or it pops up in legislature a little bit more. I think that what they're doing is great. It's a great mission, and it's profitable as well, since pretty much everything that they're capturing is donated material. The costs are pretty much all collection and then production of the sellable goods. So really, really awesome. I would highly recommend checking them out. You can follow their journey on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much everything. And they also have a website, which is really cool. And they are supported by the Arizona Recycling Coalition too. So they do have some really big local support, which is pretty awesome. And then these are just some not so fun facts. That is the presentation, but I don't know if you guys were around when Oregon legalized, but Portland did experience 7 blackouts, specifically related to cannabis production facilities during the summer heat waves. 45% of Denver's growth, this is an older statistic, but it is like 20 to 50% on any given year. Their increase in load growth or energy demand is specifically tied to growing marijuana. And back in 2018, a species called the marten, which is like a weasel type species, was basically going endangered, not specifically due to the cannabis industry, but stream diversion, pesticides, rat poison being used on large scale outdoor grows was cited as one of the main reasons for its near endangerment. So really, really impactful industry. And like I kind of mentioned in the beginning, is, as long as it's going to continue to grow like we project it is just, it's more and more important for us to kind of examine the sustainability of the industry. And if I were to rated out of 10, which is my personal opinion, I would give it a 3 or 4, as compared to, some other industries, even like craft brewing and, beer industry, which is similar in regards, which are a little bit more sustainable as far as glass packaging or whatever it may be. So a long way to go. There are strides being taken, but I think it's worth noting, and as many eyes as we can get on it, the better. So thank you guys very much.
Anders, that's great. Thank you so much for running through that whole presentation and giving us a lot to think about.
No
it was
problem.
fun to prep for this conversation a little bit, just because it got me reading about the economics of something that I don't usually get to read about the economics of. So thanks for kind of creating the opportunity. I'd love to just ask a couple of questions while we have you here. I mean,
absolutely.
And maybe first, before anything, I think I have to say I love the pun for Resinate a ton.
Yeah,
it's amazing. Well played. But I think one thing that you mentioned toward the beginning of your presentation was sort of a brief differentiation between like the hemp and the cannabis industry. And I guess one thing I'd love to just hear you talk about for a minute is like, are there differences in terms of how hemp and cannabis think about sustainability? I mean, with the 2018 Farm Bill sort of legalizing the production of hemp and CBD products on an industrial scale, sort of subsidized by the federal government, I have to imagine that that's a little bit different in kind from, state by state legalized markets that are very, very much their own thing.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the most interesting things about the plant too, there are so many variations of it that you can grow for different purposes. Some of it is very long and sinewy hemp that is grown specifically for their long fibers that you turn into clothing or rope or whatever it may be. While the CBD and the THC, if you're looking to extract those active cannabinoids, which is the effect or the medicinal properties or whatever, the type of cannabis or hemp that you grow has giant flowers and is huge and flowering, and you have to have this 8-foot spacing between the crops. Anything like that is require, your goal is to have these big, beautiful bushes and flowers and that you're pumping, full of, growth nutrients and stuff like that, is because your yield is coming from the usable cannabinoids in that plant. So in a sense like that, whether it's THC or CBD hemp, as long as it's that type of plant, that type of flowering cannabis, which is the female type of the plant, it's just going to be resource intensive pretty much no matter what. Outdoor growing is a little less resource intensive as far as the electricity, but it is more intensive as far as the water consumption. So, it's all, pros and cons in that sense. But on the entire other side of things, if you're growing the hemp, the type of cannabis for fibers, like I mentioned, it can be grown so densely together that the spacing is like half an inch. And its roots create a mat, which make it so the pesticide usage is far less than a traditional flowering plant. Plus, it's the male plant, so it doesn't attract as many pollinators, doesn't attract as many bugs. And I would say that growing that type of hemp is far more sustainable just inherently by the type of plant that it is and the resources that it requires. So it depends on what you're trying to get out of it. Most people are trying to make money, and most of the money to be made is in the big flowering plant that you're selling for THC or CBD. So as long as that's the focus, profits, I think it's going to be unsustainable to a sense.
Yeah, that's fair. And you hit on this for just a second, but can you explain in a little more detail sort of the sustainability, like the differences in terms of indoor growing versus outdoor growing? Like what are the resource constraints for both? And then how does that sort of impact maybe the consumer long term?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So both plants require some sort of medium to grow it in. Outdoor pretty much is exclusively grown in soil, which is cheaper in a sense than most indoor plants, which are grown in some sort of cocoa medium that is usually thrown out after each use. It's just overall more labor intensive to grow it indoors, as well as resource intensive because the lighting is a big part of it, as well as the temperature control. They like to be at a temperature right around 68, 69, somewhere right around their degrees. So especially in Arizona, when it's 120 during, the summer, it's just completely infeasible to grow it outside anywhere within the Phoenix Valley. So as long as it's being grown inside, especially in like traditionally, inhospitable conditions, it's going to be resource intensive. It's very similar growing methods as far as having a contained environment and a lighting source. Outdoor, you're usually more susceptible to nature. They're usually not covered. Your sunlight is coming from the sun, so there's a little bit less infrastructure cost, a little bit less, upkeep, production, electrical cost, and that type of stuff. So, but like I said, it does use more water to grow it outside.
So what incentives exist for implementing sustainable practices when you're talking about industrial cultivation, whether it's indoor or outdoor?
It's tough on a grower's side, on like the production level. There really are not that many, benefits to it. Arguably, working in marketing, one of the biggest benefits is using it as marketing material. Like obviously there's the conscience of the people, and you're like, oh, we're an ethically sourced company, or we're near organic growing methods or whatever. And market in vegetables and stuff, that's like what you look for. So cannabis is similar in that sense. There's just less of a desire for it. So there's less people growing it. It's also, the input cost becomes a lot higher. The main reason people use the pesticides and the growth nutrients and growth hormones or whatever they may be is to boost the yields artificially so they can get more money. An organically grown plant, whether it's a vegetable or cannabis, is going to typically yield less. So your yield per square foot or per square meter is going to be lower and making your cost higher. And really that is kind of not incentivizing growers to go after it.
Yeah. Well, so, so it's sort of switching from the grower side to the consumer side, like, is there a way for consumers to sort of practice any degree of sort of ethical consumption when it comes to cannabis? Or like, how do consumers know, or is it possible for consumers to know that what they're buying is in fact sustainably grown?
It's very difficult. One of the things I mentioned was, the Schedule 1 listing by the DEA prevents oversight and regulation. So there isn't really a governing body that can stamp an organic certification on cannabis right now. It's kind of there for hemp a little bit, but anything at a dispensary, 99% of it is going to be organic or non-organic, and most of that far from organic as well. It's a highly processed industry now too. So from a consumer standpoint, it's very difficult to shop sustainably. And there was actually this week an Arizona company that claimed to be like pesticide free and fertilizer free. Just this week, they got busted for falsifying lab results. So it's a thing that's, happening to this day. And, they had high levels of pesticides in it. So even what customers thought was some of the top tier or the cleanest, marijuana is actually stuff that's tainted due to shady business practices. So it's very tough on the consumer, which is why I consider public health the number one issue as far as the social sector of sustainability, because it really is a public health crisis, to be honest. If 68 people are dying from cartridges and people are ingesting pesticides, smoking too, it's a little bit different than actually eating it. You don't have the liver metabolization and stomach acid to kind of neutralize some of this stuff. It's like you're directly inhaling, burnt pesticides and other stuff like that. So it is a big concern. And I think it's so difficult for the consumer that it's just not a main focus of their shopping experience. The three main things that we see people come in for is the highest potency, what's going to get me the most high, what is the cheapest, and what is the most flavorful. It's like those three things. And then there's brand loyalty, there's other things underneath that, but really those three categories is like the majority of why people go in to buy cannabis or what they're looking for during their experience.
Wow. Well, so how does the public health aspects of cannabis consumption change in a context of national legalization? Like what's sort of the dream scenario for like addressing that very real problem of the public health component?
There just has to be some sort of governing body, I think. And once it's federally legalized, the research is going to go through the roof because, universities and a lot of other, entities, especially private entities that are afraid to research it now are going to be able to research it. And I think we're going to find a lot of stuff that we thought was good that probably isn't that good. And I think that once those walls are broken down or those barriers are broken down, I hope for a national agency kind of specifically for regulating cannabis, because we're talking a multi-billion-dollar industry, tens of billions of dollars every year in the next 5 years. So it's going to be so large. It's going to be providing so many jobs. It's going to be such a big part of everybody's lives. We're going to have something to regulate it or something to monitor it. Obviously, they're going to want to take taxes and make money off of it. But there's going to have to be some sort of intense regulation, just like there is for alcohol or food to a certain extent. You know what I mean? It has to be there. There has to be some checks and balances. And right now, money is talking, and businesses are getting away with a lot of practices that maybe if there was a little bit more regulatory power, they wouldn't be as inclined to do.
Is there, I had a follow-up question. Is there a timeline at all that's kind of expected for when federal legalization might take place?
Well, I mean, Joe Biden preached it heavily during his, campaign, and it was a big pillar of what he said he was going to do. And I would argue since, getting into office, he's taken steps kind of in the opposite direction. But there are bipartisan bills going through the House and the Senate and, always fumbling their way around in there regarding decriminalization or legalization. A couple of them made the news recently over the last few months. They always seem to get shut down due to, an inclusion or something that everybody disagrees on or something disagrees on. But I was hoping this year, to be completely honest, with the political climate and kind of some of the campaign promises as well. But obviously it's going to be a big thing. They need some sort of regulatory body. Like I said before, it's just let the floodgates out and everybody run around buying and selling weed or whatever it may be. So I'm hoping within the next 2 to 3 years is, I guess, my realistic guess at this point. Whoever the next president is, it's got to be a part of their campaign. I think whether it's Republican or conservative, polls are showing like overwhelming support from both ends of the political spectrum for at least a medical marijuana legalization across the board. So soon, hopefully.
Thanks.
Well, we're sort of getting to the end of the allotted time, but I did want to sort of cap us out with a question about sort of what aspects of the sustainability end of cannabis and the cannabis industry as a whole give you hope. Like when you wake up in the morning, like what incentivizes you to like wake up and be excited about the industry that you're in and where it's going?
I think I would argue almost with every industry, the people are kind of the most invigorating thing. It's like I'm trying to align myself with like-minded individuals and people who have similar goals of sustainability or whose businesses have heavy focuses or they prioritize sustainability. So I think, waking up and knowing that I have any number of, people locally that I can reach out to and do something good is kind of what keeps me going. There's a lot of other, whether it's on a mass scale or not, there's a lot of other people with similar mindsets. And I think we just need to get everybody together to a certain extent to kind of achieve some of these goals, because we keep hoping for top-down change, but waiting for top-down change is not what gets me out of bed in the morning. It's, helping the grassroots bottom-up change, I think.
I did have one last question, just to kind of shift over to the kind of career and networking part of this. So you did mention that you did your thesis on the sustainability of cannabis. So I just kind of wanted to ask if you could share a little more about kind of your trajectory from then to now in terms of your career, and then also share a little bit about how you got into the digital marketing space.
Yeah, totally. I'll keep it pretty brief. I played football at Willamette actually my freshman year, and I ended up getting hip surgery, like tearing my hip to shreds. And so I was like, okay, maybe sports are not the thing for me. I used cannabis recreationally at that point, and I had never really had major surgeries or anything where, severe chronic pain or anything like that. But after the surgery, I started just continuing to use it the way I would normally. And I was like, oh my goodness, like this, this helps, this works. Everybody, was so taboo about it for so long. And I kind of had these personal experiences where it kind of broke down that stigma. And I was like, this is not as bad as what everybody thinks. And, I happened to be in Oregon at the right place, right time, 2013, 2014, right when it was going from medical to recreational. And I was like, oh, this is the time to get my foot in the door. I didn't even care what I did. I volunteered on farms. I volunteered at dispensaries. I volunteered my time originally to just get my foot in the door. And then after working for a couple different brands, working for a couple different dispensaries in Oregon and Portland and Salem and Albany, I kind of saw that the biggest need in the market at that time, and still to this day, one of the largest needs is marketing. You got to spend money to make money. It doesn't really matter what industry you're in. And now, especially since cannabis has like, the Coca-Cola giants and these other people that have $50 million a year marketing budgets, it's like there's a really big need, no matter what size your business is, for marketing support, especially even one level higher with COVID, how everything became digital shopping, digital marketing, QR codes for menus and online ordering and stuff like that. We're in the digital age, and I thankfully saw the need for that. I saw how popular social media was at the time for cannabis, and still is now to a certain extent. And I think I got lucky, because I studied environmental science, and I was like, that's great. Like, I do want to be a park ranger. I do want to work in, water testing or whatever I'm going to do. But like, I saw this huge opportunity, and I was like, okay, I can teach myself, photography and graphic design and, digital marketing to a certain extent. And then I ended up taking paid courses and kind of like going down that route of getting certified for it. Once I was like, yeah, this is going to give me some longevity and some need in the industry as well. So partially luck, partially looking ahead, I would say.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. One, I guess I keep saying it's going to be the last question.
No, you're good. You're good. I love it.
Not getting there. If there are folks who are watching this who are interested in learning more, would it be all right if they reached out to you sort of for either career advice or just advice on sort of how to get to where they might want to be if they do want to be in the industry?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I love helping people get to this point, or you just take their first steps in the industry. Like I said, it's growing so rapidly. The job market is pretty strong. So if you have an interest, even if it's an ancillary service, like HVAC is booming because of it. Like, there's so many things that are related to cannabis that you wouldn't expect that are booming as a result of this industry. So if you have skills, the cannabis industry needs you.
Seems like a good place to sort of wrap up.
Yeah.
Well, I'll close this out. As we mentioned before, this event is hosted by the Willamette University Sustainability Network. Our network is a new affinity group of Willamette graduates, staff, faculty, and current students who are interested in sustainability-related issues or who work in sustainability-related fields. And many of our alumni engage primarily to build connections, share resources, and advocate for change. So anyone interested in participating in the network at any level can, and we would encourage you to join in. You can find us under the community page at the new WUConnect platform, which you can find a link to below. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us this evening. Anders, thank you so much for this informative presentation. Hopefully everybody found some value in this stuff, and we look forward to seeing you at different Willamette University Sustainability Network events in the future. Take care, everybody.